Thank you so much, everybody. I'm coming with the most fun topic today, or not. So this is a talk by Sonja Fitzek and myself. Sonja cannot be here today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about green video game making processes and practices. And what I'm gonna start with is why I'm not talking about the apocalypse in-game. Then I quickly introduce the project strategies that you already heard about. And then I'm gonna go into these processes and practices that are teased in the title. So Sonja was here last year and she started her talk with an example from a video game, and I brought a screenshot today again. This is a climate game march that marked the end of the Rebirth event in Riders Republic by Ubisoft. So players were equipped with virtual green t-shirts and banners and megaphones so that they could creatively express their support for the climate cause. This was the end of an in-game activation that was like a reforestation event after parts of the map were set on fire, and players were kind of encouraged to, engage with other players to save these forests. And environmental collapse and the threat of the climate apocalypse are an increasingly popular theme in video games. This is conference talks in the next couple of days. We'll explore these. And they have been discussed with various names, like eco games, but also as part of a genre of cli-fi, or been called sustainable media, eco media, or green popular culture. So what research so far has shown is that ecologically informed narratives, mechanics, and game design tactics are frequently deployed to shift players' notions about sustainability. And this was also expressed by game developers in a previous project. A developer who was actually, part of the development team of the Rebirth event we just saw said, delivering positive messages is the future of video games. Our players are expecting that. We need to do politics. We need to find a balance of how to do it. So ecological messages can shift cultural values of players. But there is another aspect that I want to talk about today, and that is that games rely on long value chains and human labor and production processes and material resources. And this means that games against the climate apocalypse are very much participating in the destruction of the planet. This is the fun topic I will be addressing today. So Ben Abrahams, in his book Digital Games After Climate Change, tried to explore the impact of the gaming industry for climate change. And he says that a green game is one that acknowledges its place in the material world and takes steps to eliminate the harm it causes to humans, plants, animals, and the planet. And these are exactly the relations that we are interested in the project that I'm a part of. So who are we? I'm part of EU Horizon project that is called Strategies, with a lot of different partners in different European countries who study both the production, the distribution, the possibilities for hacking games, etc., in regard to ecological sustainability. And I'm in a work package that is called People and the Planet, and Games, of course. We are I'm working at the Cologne Game Lab of the University for Applied Sciences in Cologne, and we are collaborating with Spielfabrik. We saw Mattes in the first talk, who is also a researcher in the project, and then at CGL there is Sonja that I mentioned, and myself. So. I'm a cultural anthropologist by training, and I focus a lot on digital anthropology and science and technology studies. And I'm particularly interested in the material dimensions, the embodied dimensions of digital practices. And this is also what we're kind of looking at in this project. So we want to explore the possibilities for green games, not only for green themed games, but also for green game development. How do we want to do that? Actually, this project is just starting. It started this year, as you may have seen. So the research that is planned is an ethnographic approach with game development studios in different European countries. We'll have quite large online survey and interviews with various actors that are included in this process. So coming from anthropology, with this SDS background, my ethnographic approach is a brexographic one. And why do I say this is because it's important for the title and how this came to be. I'm interested in practices, that is what people do, but what people do with the world and with a processual understanding that means, that things can change over time. So we are really interested in green game development practices, but not just the people, but who is involved, what regulations are involved, what actors are involved. Why is this an issue? So I'll start with the development processes. So one developer said, I think the general perception is that games are virtual, so it's quite okay for the environment because it's all digital. And this is a common notion, so the planetary costs of video games are often not considered because we talk about games as media, as art, as virtual worlds, or as commodity, but often it is considered an immaterial commodity. So the planetary costs of gaming are less visible, they are less tangible, and they are more abstract. And one of the main problems that I will address today is they are very much spread out. What do I mean by that? So this is a map. You don't need to read it. This maps out a few concerns for sustainability that have been addressed in literature, and this starts with people playing a game which relies on hardware which is on one hand very power hungry, but also uses a lot of raw resources. We have the distribution of games. We have the game development process who relies on various connections. So I will not bother you with all these things, but I will pick out a few aspects that I will address today. So the problem with this spread outness of sustainability is that it's very difficult for developers to decide where to start. And the most common notion contemporarily with what to start is decarbonization. And decarbonization is tries to reduce carbon emissions, but it already requires a specific climate knowledge that identified carbon emissions as the major cause and accelerator of heating the planet. And it has become a major concern, particularly since 2017, since the Paris agreements, where the net zero idea was agreed upon. So currently a lot of regulations focus on concerns of reducing carbon emissions. In game development, this is true too. But what do we need for this reduction? And that is, we first kind of need to know what kind of carbon emissions we have. And this is often called carbon footprint. And we have various carbon footprints that are measured or calculated, actually, of different actors like studios. Ben Abraham, before mentioned, with the book Digital Games After Climate Change, tried to analyze the carbon footprint of the gaming industry, but doing so was quite difficult because there are only partial records and reports by the industry, which means he had to, individually measure devices himself, then kind of calculate and estimate carbon footprints based on the data that was reported and that he collected himself. So that means the numbers of a carbon footprint of the game industry remain an estimate in many parts. We don't know this exactly, and this brings me to the challenge that the first step needed towards a decarbonization is then, of course, we need these measurements by game developers. Why is it difficult to get these measurements? I'm going to bother you with another thing. And these are 3 scopes of emissions that were, fixed with the greenhouse gas protocols, but differentiates between scope 1 emissions that are direct emissions. I'm burning wood for my oven. Scope 2 emissions, I'm getting electricity, so somebody else is burning something and causing emissions for me to get electricity. And scope 3 is everything else. And the problem with the gaming industry and sustainability is that mostly everything is happening in scope 3. So for a game development studio, they don't have so many scope 1 and 2 emissions, but scope 3 emissions is really what it is about. And these scope 3 emissions are very difficult to measure because they do not happen in one place, but in many. They are not, caused by one actor, but by multiple. And why I'm bothering you with all these different epistemic frameworks is because, as an anthropologist, I'm always interested in how things become thinkable for people. But more than just, like a specific language or a specific lingo when it comes to sustainability issues, it is also like a framework that governs what is possible, what practices are possible, and how game developers can address certain issues or not, because these are kind of tools to kind of tackle problems. What do I mean by that? So I'll try to exemplify this by looking at hardware, but first I want to point out the problem that these like scope 3 emissions, like we have the workplace, like the office of game developers, where emissions take place. But more than that, like all of the scope 3 emissions are an issue that is not limited to this one side of a game development studio, but they are spread around the globe, right? Like because people are shipped from here to there, etc. So it is much more a problem of general gaming technocultures and how processes work, rather than just focused on game development. So when we look at hardware as one of the main material issues that we have when we look at gaming and sustainability, I already discussed carbon emissions, and I will not discuss electricity again. Electricity is kind of tied to these carbon emissions. But more than that, also hardware is relying on planetary resources, sometimes precious metals and rare earths. Ben Abraham's kind of tried to make a list also of what kind of materials are even involved in a PlayStation 5, for example. But the problem is that the semiconductor industry is quite intransparent, and it's kind of difficult to also find out what even is involved in these processes. And this is tied to the fast obsolescence of machines that is not only in gaming, but in contemporary computer culture, but particularly in gaming because games require high-performance machines, and new games require newer machines, to put it quite simply. And like in the gaming industry, this is often brought back to Moore's law and the idea that we have this exponential growth of processing power, which again for me as a cultural anthropologist is interesting because Moore's law goes back to this observation that Moore made shortly after microprocessors were introduced, and he said every 2 years the transistors kind of double. But then this observation that he made at a very early stage of computing is still governing how hardware, particularly when it comes to graphic cards for computers, are now developed. So companies like NVIDIA try to double their processing power every 1.5 or 2 years. And this problem of fast obsolescence is then again, tied to issues of recycling, because particularly in gaming consoles, everything is kind of meshed up, glued together. So it's very difficult for recycling. The potentials for recyclings are not yet explored a lot. And the last point I want to address here is that these are all problems of computer culture, as I said, but these are also technocultures that are entangled with capitalistic production and extractivist values. So what I mean by that is that the mining of planetary resources is not discussed as a problem that comes with enormous costs for people and the planet, but it is part of a discussion of achieving higher performance. So we have very fundamental logics that are reproduced. However, the game developers we talk to challenge these notions, which brings me to the development practices. So the developers we talk to in our project are quite passionate about sustainability issues, but it is very difficult to achieve that in practice, even though they would want to. And this is linked to, this is larger cultural issues. But it also brings me to another epistemic framework I will bother you with today, and that is the 3 pillars of sustainability that are very often talked about when it comes also to ecological sustainability. Alongside people and the planet, we also see profit, like on a taxonomy level, we obviously see, there are very different scales on which these 3 kind of things operate. It's profit is also a very abstract anthropocentric notion of a monetary value and how it is created. But it is a very important aspect in, obviously, the practices of game development. Why is that? So many game devs struggle with the problem that profit is the fixed assumption in this whole equation. It's not people and the planet, but profit is the non-negotiable, and the other 2 are kind of optional. So this is also linked to, not limited to the gaming industry, but we see this also in other fields of capitalistic production, that kind of the byproducts, the waste, etc., are not discussed as a part of capitalistic production, but something, that is kind of separate. So it's cut off from this production process so that we might ignore or neglect it. At the same time, now for many initiatives, profit, sustainability as a selling point is a very important notion. That means the idea that it needs sustainability to remain economically sustainable is kind of pushed, which is also linked that game industry, like others, is also influenced by climate change, so it kind of has to deal with this issue. But at the same time, too much focus on the selling point leads to what developers criticize as greenwashing. But the third aspect is that particularly for indie studios, it's not even about profit as in making money, but it's about survival. It's about your studio being still there the next year. For AAA studios, it's often that the game becomes a success because they really rely on this one game becoming a success. And this kind of makes it difficult to think about other issues. All of this is embedded in the social aspect and we heard a little bit about this already, where we have game developers with a lot of, with quite precarious working conditions. Issues that are discussed are crunch time, the lack of unionization, but general game production culture and how it is often not formalized, what procedures this includes, etc. But at the same time, the developers we talked to so far also describe themselves as creative workers. They are driven by passion, and this is a stance that they often link to their engagement for more sustainability. And this leads to a lot of bottom-up strategies that try to achieve this transformation that I will just briefly line out, because detailed research also will only take place. So one aspect to tackle this is local actions, which is research partners establishing green committees and often collaborating also with local initiatives on sustainability. This is particularly when it is related to the office issues. Most developer thinks it's kind of boring, but then again, those that try these strategies saw that it is quite effective and something that can be implemented fast because it is, more locally embedded. The second aspect is that a lot of the game devs we talk to develop tools, and I just brought one example because it is so detailed and so amazing also in what it addressed. This is Arnaud Fayot's climate game toolkit. It presents a large variety how to include climate action in your game, and it has been shared with other developers to kind of help them achieve that too. Which brings me to the point initiatives and networks. It was shared via an initiative, and there have been a lot of initiatives in recent years that address exactly these problems, like the Playing for the Planet Alliance, or the initiative that the tool was invented with was the Climate Special Interest Group by the IGDA, the International Game Developers Alliance, who has a large variety of activities like strategy meetings, but also book clubs where they discuss, green games, etc. And they share a lot of tools. They also released the probably most extensive account and guideline to develop a green game with the environmental game design playbook. And the question that kind of remains that we want to address in this project that emerged from these strategies of developers is how to transfer these local actions. How can you use these strategies that are developed locally by a certain studio? How can somebody else implement this? How can this be done at a different place? And I want to end with a quote. So Arnaud, whose toolkit you said, right now, the current cultural impact of games, we are used to hear the same stories in our world. The story of capitalism, the story of power, fantasy. You need to exploit nature to collect all the resources, which can make you stronger, richer, general competition, leaderboards. This is the story of video games. This is a reflection of the dominant story we tell that brought us to climate change. There's a lot we can do. We can shift the stories. And he's talking about in-game aspects, so about shifting the stories of video games. But then this brings us to the question of, can we shift the story of video game making? I tried to show that game developers very much develop these strategies, but it is not only on their shoulders, and I hope that our project will contribute to also tell you more in the future about what else is needed to really enable a greener game development. Thank you.